A CEO's dismissive joke became the turning point that nobody saw coming. A powerful woman's casual challenge to a skilled mechanic ignited a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. Their worlds collided in the most unexpected way when she uttered those fateful words, "If you fix this engine, I'll marry you." Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The rain hammered against the windshield with relentless fury. Each drop, a percussive reminder of nature's indifference to human schedules. Sarah Wellington gripped the leather steering wheel of her luxury sedan, knuckles whitening as the engine made a sickening sound. First a sputter, then a whine, and finally a defeated silence. The car rolled to a stop on the narrow country road, miles from the Chicago skyline, where she commanded respect as CEO of Wellington Foods. "No, not today, not now." Her voice cut through the darkness, sharp with disbelief. Sarah checked her smartphone. No signal bars, of course. She stepped out into the downpour, her designer heels immediately sinking into the muddy shoulder. The rain showed no mercy, soaking through her tailored blazer within seconds. Mascara began tracking down her cheeks in thin black rivulets as she popped the hood, staring at the engine compartment as if her executive glare might intimidate it back to life. Steam rose from the metal, mingling with the rain in a ghostly dance. Sarah's corporate troubleshooting skills meant nothing here. For all her power in boardrooms, for all her ability to make million-dollar decisions with a single nod, she stood helpless before this mechanical rebellion. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, slamming the hood shut. The sound was swallowed by a crack of thunder that seemed to mock her frustration. Through the curtain of rain, a faint glow caught her eye. Squinting, Sarah could just make out a sign about quarter-mile down the road, "Jackson's Auto Repair." The letters flickered in neon blue, a lighthouse in her storm of inconvenience. With determination born from years of corporate battles, she locked her vehicle and began walking. Each step in her waterlogged shoes felt like a surrender of dignity. The mud clung to her heels, the rain plastered her carefully styled hair to her face. This wasn't how Sarah Wellington traveled. This wasn't how her day was supposed to unfold. The small town of Millbrook had never been more than a name on a map to her, a dot to pass through on the way to somewhere important. Now it held her salvation in the form of a rural mechanic's shop. As she trudged forward, the protective layers she'd built around herself, the confidence of wealth, the armor of authority, seemed to wash away with the rain. Without her corner office, without her executive assistant, without the trappings of her position, she was just a woman caught in a storm. The light grew closer, warm, and steady. Sarah Wellington straightened her shoulders, summoning what dignity remained. She had no idea that each step was carrying her not just toward shelter, but toward a night that would challenge everything she thought she knew about control, connection, and her carefully constructed life. The smell of motor oil, rubber, and warm metal embraced Sarah Wellington as she burst through the door of Jackson's Auto Repair, rainwater cascading from her designer coat. The garage was smaller than she expected, cramped but meticulously organized, with tools hanging in perfect alignment on a worn pegboard. A radio in the corner played soft jazz, barely audible above the drumming rain on the metal roof. Michael Jackson looked up from the engine he was working on, wiping his hands methodically on stained blue overalls that had seen years of honest labor. His eyes, kind but cautious, assessed the drenched woman who had just invaded his space. "I need my car fixed immediately," Sarah demanded, her voice carrying the same authoritative tone that commanded boardrooms in Chicago. "It's the black luxury sedan, about half a mile down the road." The mechanic continued wiping his hands, unhurried. "Ma'am, I can tow your vehicle in tonight, but repairs will have to wait until morning. I don't rush safety checks, especially not in this weather." Sarah's perfectly manicured hand tightened around her useless smartphone. The screen remained dark. No signal, no power, no control. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, a hint of disbelief in her voice. "Someone with a broken-down car in need of help." Michael replied simply, reaching for a clipboard. "And I will help you. First thing tomorrow." The warmth of the garage contrasted sharply with the cold rejection of her demands. Sarah was used to people jumping at her commands, rearranging schedules at her whim. The mechanic's calm refusal felt like a personal affront. "Look," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I have an extremely important meeting in Chicago tomorrow morning. Wellington Foods can't run itself." Michael nodded, understanding dawning in his expression. "The Food Corporation, I've heard of it." He hung the rag on a nearby hook, "but rushing repairs in the dark could mean missing something critical. I won't compromise on that, not even for a CEO." Sarah's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching beneath her skin. A frustrated laugh escaped her lips before she could contain it. "If you fix this engine tonight, I'll marry you," she blurted out, the absurdity of her statement hanging in the air between them. The mechanic's expression didn't change. He simply met her gaze, unflinching, his eyes reflecting something that looked remarkably like amusement mixed with quiet dignity. "Deal," he said with a slight nod. "But I do things my way around here." Emma Jackson peered around the corner of the workshop, her bright eyes wide with curiosity. The 8-year-old studied the elegant stranger who had burst through the door moments earlier, dripping rainwater onto the concrete floor of her father's garage. Unlike most of Michael's customers, this woman wore high heels and what looked like very expensive clothes, now thoroughly soaked from the storm. "Would you like some hot chocolate?" Emma asked, stepping fully into view with a steaming mug already prepared. "I made it with cinnamon. Dad says it's the best cure for bad weather." Sarah Wellington blinked, momentarily thrown by the child's unexpected appearance. She'd been mentally drafting emails to reschedule tomorrow's meetings when the girl's voice pulled her back to reality. Yes, thank you," Sarah replied, accepting the mug with cold fingers. The warmth seeped through her palms, a stark contrast to the chill that had settled in her bones during her trek through the downpour. "I'm Emma," the child announced proudly. "My dad's fixing your car tomorrow. You can sit by the heater if you want." She pointed to an old space heater humming in the corner of the small office adjacent to the workshop. "It's much better than standing in wet clothes." Sarah followed Emma's suggestion, surprised at herself for taking direction from a child. In Chicago, she commanded boardrooms and made decisions that affected thousands of employees. Yet here, in this small-town garage, she found herself trailing behind a little girl who spoke with the confidence of someone who knew she belonged. The office was cluttered but cozy. Family photos lined the walls, Emma missing front teeth in school pictures, Michael in overalls at community events, and an older woman who must have been a relative. A hand-drawn picture labeled "Daddy's Garage" in crayon was pinned prominently above a desk, scattered with invoices. "Do you live in a mansion?" Emma asked, perching on a worn office chair that swiveled as she spoke. "Your clothes look fancy," Michael called from the workshop. "Emma, don't interrogate our guest." The little girl giggled, a sound so genuine that Sarah found herself smiling in response. "It's fine," she called back to the mechanic, then to Emma. "Not a mansion, but a penthouse in the city." "What's a penthouse?" Emma's questions continued, each one more disarming than the last. As the storm raged outside, Sarah sipped her cinnamon-spiced chocolate and answered Emma's innocent queries. The old building creaked and settled around them, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the heater or the hot drink, but everything to do with the gentle, welcoming chaos of this little family. Emma's laughter, Michael's occasional comments from the workshop, and even the rhythmic tapping of rain on the roof created a melody that Sarah hadn't known she needed. The morning light filtered through the garage windows as Sarah Wellington watched Michael Jackson methodically inspect her luxury car. His large hands moved with surprising delicacy across the engine components, a stark contrast to her own world, where problems were solved with money and authority, not patience and skill. "Found it," Michael announced, holding up a tiny fuse between his fingers. This little thing was hiding behind the main circuit board, almost invisible unless you know exactly where to look. Sarah leaned closer, squinting at the minuscule component. "That's it? That tiny thing stranded me in the middle of nowhere?" Michael nodded, a gentle smile crossing his face. "Sometimes the smallest parts cause the biggest problems. Can't just throw money at this kind of issue. You've got to take your time. Understand the system." The mechanic's words struck Sarah with unexpected force. In her corporate world, problems were obstacles to be bulldozed with resources and influence. Here, in this humble garage, Michael demonstrated a different kind of power, the strength of patience and precision. "How did you know where to look?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Experience," he replied, wiping his hands on a rag. "My father taught me to listen to engines. They talk to you if you pay attention." Sarah watched as he worked, his movements economical and purposeful. No wasted motion, no unnecessary flourish. The CEO found herself strangely fascinated by his approach, so different from the performative confidence that dominated her boardrooms. Within the hour, the engine purred to life. Michael closed the hood with a satisfying thunk and handed Sarah her keys. "Good as new. Should get you back to Chicago without any trouble." Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Sarah felt an unexpected jolt. "Thank you," she said, suddenly aware of how rarely those words left her lips with genuine meaning. "Just doing my job," he responded, his eyes warm but unreadable. The drive back to Chicago gave Sarah too much time to think. The skyscrapers gradually appeared on the horizon, glass and steel monuments to ambition and power. Yet her mind kept returning to Millbrook's simplicity, to Emma's infectious laughter and Michael's quiet competence. When she finally reached Wellington Foods headquarters, the familiar security checkpoint and executive parking space should have felt like coming home. Instead, they felt like putting on an old, uncomfortable suit. Sarah had barely settled at her desk when her assistant burst in. "Ms. Wellington, Richard Harris is waiting in the conference room. He's called an emergency meeting with the board members." The CEO's spine stiffened. Richard Harris, her most ruthless rival, had been circling her position for months. His sudden appearance could only mean trouble. "Tell them I'll be right there," she said, her corporate armor sliding back into place. The warmth of Millbrook faded as she prepared for battle. Richard Harris leaned against the doorframe of the glass-walled conference room, his expensive suit perfectly tailored to his frame. The smirk on his face radiated pure menace as he watched Sarah Wellington gather her presentation materials. "Quite the adventure you had this weekend," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Car trouble in some backwater town. Not very CEO-like to disappear during a critical planning phase." Sarah straightened her spine, refusing to show surprise. "I wasn't aware my schedule required your approval." "Richard?" The executive stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The board is talking, Sarah. They're wondering if you've lost your edge. First, the sustainability initiative that cuts into our margins, and now you're missing meetings to play damsel in distress in, what was it called? Millpond?" "Millbrook," she corrected, her voice ice-cold despite the heat rising in her cheeks. Richard circled the conference table like a predator. "3 board members called me this weekend. Concerned about your commitment. They're questioning your judgment," He tapped a finger against the polished wood. "And I have to say, I share their concerns." Sarah squared her shoulders, facing her rival directly. "My commitment is to this company's future, not just next quarter's profits. If you'd bothered to review the projections I sent—" "Numbers can be manipulated," he cut in. "What can't be faked is presence, leadership. Being there when it matters." She pulled up the quarterly report on her tablet and thrust it toward him. "Wellington Foods has seen 15% growth under my leadership. Customer loyalty is at an all-time high. These aren't manipulated numbers, they're results." Richard's smile never reached his eyes. "Results from strategies your predecessor put in place. The question is, what happens next?" He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. The board meets next week. I'd prepare carefully if I were you." After he left, Sarah sank into her chair, her hands trembling slightly. She'd faced corporate sharks before, but Richard's attack felt personal, and worse, calculated. That evening, Sarah stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse, 38 floors above Chicago. The city lights spread before her like a galaxy, thousands of lives intersecting in the darkness below. Despite the spectacular view, she'd never felt more isolated. She thought of Michael Jackson's garage, cramped, cluttered, but somehow warmer than this pristine showcase she called home. She thought of Emma's bright eyes and easy laughter. The memory made the emptiness of her apartment even more pronounced. Sarah poured herself a glass of wine, the liquid catching the city lights as she raised it to her lips. Success had given her everything she'd ever wanted, yet tonight it felt hollow, a perfect shell with nothing inside. Sarah Wellington straightened her navy silk blazer as she entered the boardroom of Wellington Foods. The executive table stretched before her like a battlefield, with 12 skeptical faces staring back. She placed her presentation folder on the polished mahogany surface, aware that today's meeting would define her leadership. "Our company has always prioritized profit," she began, her voice steady despite the tension. "But I'm proposing a fundamental shift in our approach. Empathy and community responsibility aren't just buzzwords. They're sound business strategies for long-term growth." Richard Harris leaned forward, his expression calculated. "Shareholders don't invest in feelings, Sarah. They invest in returns." Several board members nodded in agreement. "This isn't about feelings," she countered, clicking to a slide showing projected revenue graphs. "It's about sustainability. Our Midwest expansion can revolutionize how we source ingredients, reduce transportation costs, and create jobs in communities that will become loyal customers." As Sarah outlined her vision, she thought of Michael Jackson's garage in Millbrook, how its modest operations served the community while maintaining profitability. The memory gave her words conviction. "Wellington Foods can lead the industry in ethical practices while increasing market share," she continued. "Yet the numbers support this direction." Patricia Winters, the oldest board member, she removed her glasses. "It's an admirable vision, but risky. We've never prioritized community impact over immediate returns." The debate stretched for 2 hours. Sarah defended each point with precision, drawing on both data and the perspective she'd gained during her unexpected stay in Millbrook. When Richard suggested her judgment might be compromised by sentimental distractions, she met his gaze directly. "My judgment has never been clearer," she replied, "and I'm prepared to stake my reputation on this direction." When the vote finally came, Sarah held her breath. 7 hands raised in support, 5 against, victory, but barely. Later, alone in her corner office overlooking Chicago's skyline, Sarah should have felt triumphant. Instead, she stared at the city lights blurring through the glass. The wind felt hollow, without genuine allies who believed in her vision rather than just her track record. She picked up her phone, scrolling to the photo she'd taken of Jackson's auto repair. The simple building with its warm lights had housed more authentic connection than she'd felt in years of executive meetings. She thought of Emma's infectious laugh, of Michael's quiet confidence as he worked on her car. Sarah set down her phone and turned back to the window. For the first time in her career, professional victory wasn't enough. Something in Millbrook had awakened a hunger for connection that no boardroom success could satisfy. Sarah Wellington stood at the head of the mahogany conference table, her voice unwavering as she announced Wellington Foods' acquisition of the Midwest Division. The board members nodded approvingly until she dropped the bombshell that left the room in stunned silence. Effective immediately, "I am stepping down as CEO." Gasps echoed across the glass-walled room. The executives exchanged bewildered glances, their faces morphing from shock to disbelief. Sarah had anticipated their reaction, but the coldness that followed cut deeper than she'd expected. "You're abandoning ship at our most critical expansion," demanded Victor, her longest-standing ally on the board. His accusation hung in the air, heavy with betrayal. "I'm not abandoning anything," Sarah replied, maintaining her composure. "I'll be personally overseeing the new subsidiary in Millbrook. It needs hands-on leadership to align with our vision." Richard Harris leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. How convenient. The great Sarah Wellington. Running away to play small-town hero. She met his gaze without flinching. "Sometimes the biggest impact happens in the smallest places, Richard." The meeting adjourned in a flurry of whispers. Former allies brushed past her without acknowledgement, their shoulders stiff with disapproval. Colleagues who had once laughed at her jokes now regarded her with suspicious eyes, as if her decision had revealed some fundamental flaw in her character. Back in her office, Sarah methodically emptied her desk drawers, 15 years of climbing the corporate ladder, reduced to 3 cardboard boxes. She lifted the Crystal Award for Business Leader of the Year, remembering how desperately she'd wanted it. Now it felt cold and meaningless in her hands. Her assistant appeared at the doorway, eyes red-rimmed. "Your car is ready downstairs, Ms. Wellington." "Thank you, Diane." Sarah hesitated, then added, "But I'm sorry I couldn't explain everything." The woman nodded stiffly before retreating. Another bridge burned. As Sarah carried her boxes through the executive floor, she caught glimpses of her life's work, the marketing campaign that had doubled their market share, the sustainability initiative she'd fought for against shareholder resistance, achievements that had once defined her worth. The elevator doors closed on that chapter of her life. In the underground parking garage, she loaded her belongings into her luxury vehicle and slid behind the wheel. The engine purred to life, perfectly maintained, unlike the one that had failed her that stormy night in Millbrook. As she drove away from the Chicago skyline, Sarah felt a curious lightness replacing the weight of corporate expectations. Her future was uncharted, her reputation in tatters among her peers. Yet as the highway stretched before her toward Millbrook, her resolve only strengthened. For the first time in years, she wasn't following a strategic plan. She was following her heart. Sarah Wellington stared at the spreadsheet on her laptop screen, the numbers blurring as fatigue set in. Launching Wellington Sustainable Foods as a subsidiary had been more challenging than she'd anticipated. The conference call had ended 10 minutes ago, leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. "We're concerned about the profit margins," one investor had said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Sustainability is a nice buzzword, but the board expects returns." The former CEO rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of her decision. She'd walked away from the corporate throne she'd spent 15 years building, as all to pursue something meaningful in Millbrook. Now, her vision for an environmentally responsible food processing plant was being met with resistance at every turn. Her phone buzzed with another email, the third potential investor backing out this week. The message was politely worded but clear. Her focus on sustainable practices and fair wages was deemed too risky. They don't understand, Sarah muttered to herself, closing her laptop with more force than necessary. The empty hotel room felt sterile and cold compared to the warmth of Jackson's auto repair. She found herself thinking about Michael's methodical approach to fixing engines. How he never rushed, never compromised on quality, even when customers grew impatient. The mechanic had a quiet confidence that Sarah envied now, a certainty in his skills that didn't waver with criticism. Outside her window, Chicago's skyline glittered with artificial light. Sarah had once found power in those towers, but now they seemed hollow. Her former colleagues were already distancing themselves, treating her like she'd lost her mind rather than found her purpose. Ms. Wellington, her assistant had whispered earlier that day, Richard Harris is telling everyone you had some sort of breakdown. Sarah straightened her shoulders and opened her laptop again. Her analytical mind, the same one that had earned her the CEO position at 32, began formulating new approaches. She'd need to restructure the proposal, emphasize the long-term benefits, find partners who valued more than quarterly profits. Each rejection felt personal. A judgment, not just on her business plan, but on her transformation. Doubt crept in during quiet moments. Was she foolish to believe she could change an industry built on exploitation? But then she remembered Emma's bright smile when she'd explained her vision for the factory, how Michael had nodded with approval when she mentioned creating jobs that wouldn't force people to choose between dignity and survival. Sarah took a deep breath and began typing again. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but neither was fixing an engine in the pouring rain, and if a humble mechanic from Millbrook could face challenges with steady hands and unwavering focus, so could she. Sarah Wellington found herself seated at a worn wooden table in the back of Maggie's restaurant, surrounded by scattered papers and the comforting aroma of freshly baked apple pie. The restaurant owner placed steaming mugs of coffee before Sarah and Michelle, the town's energetic community leader whose enthusiasm seemed boundless even at this late hour. "What if we combine the craft fair with a farmer's market?" Michelle suggested, her eyes bright with possibility. "We could bring in visitors from neighboring towns." Maggie nodded sagely, sliding generous slices of pie toward them. "My cousin in Westfield would bring her quilts. People drive for miles to see them." Sarah absorbed their ideas, mentally translating community spirit into economic potential. This was different from corporate strategy meetings where numbers ruled supreme. Here, each suggestion came with a story, a face, a history. "We could set up a rotation system," Sarah offered, jotting notes. "Local businesses could take turns hosting job fairs. It creates foot traffic for the hosts and visibility for job seekers." The women worked late into the night, their laughter occasionally breaking the quiet hum of the empty restaurant. Sarah found herself sharing stories from her corporate days, surprised at how easily she could now laugh at the absurdity of boardroom politics. Within weeks, their plans materialized. The first job fair at the community center drew twice the expected attendance. Sarah watched as neighbors connected with local business owners, handshakes replacing formal interviews, genuine smiles replacing rehearsed pleasantries. The food drive followed, with collection boxes appearing in every shop along Main Street. Sarah's analytical mind had calculated expected donations, but the community's generosity exceeded every projection. When they delivered packages to families in need, Sarah experienced a fulfillment that no quarterly profit report had ever provided. The campaign for local crafts proved particularly successful. Sarah helped artisans price their work fairly while maintaining accessibility, a delicate balance she navigated with newfound patience. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah spotted Michael Jackson standing proudly near the library entrance. watching as Emma helped younger children select books at the community swap she'd organized. The mechanic's face glowed with quiet pride as his daughter carefully recorded each exchange in a notebook, her small hands moving with purpose. "She came up with the whole system herself," Michael told Sarah as she approached, "said everyone deserves good stories." Sarah watched Emma's infectious enthusiasm as she matched readers with books, the child's joy radiating through the room. Something shifted inside Sarah, a recognition that spreadsheets and profit margins could never capture this kind of success. In Emma's simple act of connection, Sarah glimpsed what truly mattered in building not just an economy, but a community. The success of Jackson's auto repair had always drawn envious glances from across town. Frank Donovan, owner of Donovan's Mechanics, watched with growing resentment as Michael Jackson's reputation soared. The arrival of Sarah Wellington, with her city polish and business connections, only intensified his jealousy. One night, while Millbrook slept under a blanket of stars, Frank slipped into the garage through the back window. With practiced hands, he tampered with the electrical system, crossing wires and loosening connections that would spark when powered. He left as silently as he'd come, smirking at the thought of Michael's business literally going up in flames. Sarah Wellington arrived early the next morning, hoping to discuss her community revitalization plans with Michael before his day became busy. The garage door was unlocked, but the lights wouldn't turn on. Something felt wrong. Years of corporate espionage and boardroom betrayals had honed her instincts for danger. "Hello," she called, pulling out her phone for light. The beam caught something unusual, exposed wiring where there shouldn't be any. Sarah moved closer, careful not to touch anything. The configuration was deliberate, meant to cause a fire when the main power was switched on. "Michael!" she shouted, rushing outside just as his truck pulled up. The mechanic's face transformed from morning cheerfulness to grave concern as Sarah explained what she'd found. Together, they entered the garage, Michael's expertise and Sarah's analytical mind working in tandem to trace the sabotage. "Someone knows exactly what they're doing," Michael muttered, carefully disconnecting the tampered sections. "This could have destroyed everything my father built." Sarah helped him sort through the damaged components, her designer clothes collecting grease stains she didn't even notice. For hours, they worked side by side, her corporate strategies now focused on saving this small business that had come to mean so much to her. By afternoon, the garage was safe again. Michael installed a security system Sarah insisted on paying for, though he protested weakly. "You've got enemies," she said, wiping her hands on a shop rag. "I know what that's like." Michael Jackson looked at her then, really looked, seeing beyond the CEO title to the woman who'd just spent her day crawling under workbenches to help him. His gratitude ran deeper than words could express, and something else flickered in his eyes, something neither of them was ready to acknowledge. "Thank you," he said simply, his hand briefly touching hers. Sarah nodded, that unspoken connection between them growing stronger than any business partnership she'd ever known. In saving his garage, she'd found something she hadn't realized she was searching for. The autumn festival transformed Millbrook into a canvas of vibrant colors. Orange and yellow banners fluttered across Main Street, while fairy lights twinkled between the old oak trees. Sarah Wellington, who typically buried herself in spreadsheets and business strategies, found herself standing on a rickety ladder, stringing lanterns alongside Emma Jackson. "Higher, Miss Sarah," Emma called out, her bright eyes sparkling with excitement. "The lights need to go all the way to the top," Sarah laughed, reaching up as far as her arms would allow. Just months ago, her idea of celebration had been champagne at corporate galas. Now, She was balancing precariously on a wooden ladder, her designer jeans dusted with glitter, and somehow it felt more authentic than any achievement in her former life. Later that afternoon, Sarah wandered through the community stalls, sampling Maggie's famous pumpkin soup. The restaurant owner beamed with pride as she ladled the steaming liquid into a paper cup. "Secret family recipe," Maggie confided, winking. "Been making it for 27 years, and I still won't write it down." Michelle joined them, clipboard in hand, checking off festival activities with her characteristic efficiency. "The bonfire's ready, the music lineup is set, and we've got more visitors than last year already," she announced. Satisfaction evident in her voice. As twilight descended, the townspeople gathered by the lake, where strings of lights reflected on the water's surface. Children chased fireflies, while elderly couples settled into folding chairs, blankets across their laps against the autumn chill. Michael Jackson took his place on the small wooden platform that served as a stage. He adjusted his guitar strap and nodded to the small crowd. Sarah had never seen him like this before. His usual mechanic's confidence transformed into something more vulnerable, yet equally compelling. When he began to play, the gentle notes floated across the water. His voice, warm and steady, sang of hometown roots and unexpected journeys. Sarah found herself transfixed, seeing a new dimension to the man she'd first met on that stormy night. Emma sidled up beside Sarah, slipping her small hand into the businesswoman's. "Dad's been playing since before I was born," she whispered proudly. "He says music fixes things that wrenches can't." Under the golden glow of lanterns and stars, with Michael's melody wrapping around her like a familiar embrace, Sarah felt something shift inside her. The boundaries between who she had been and who she might become seemed to blur, like watercolors mixing on canvas. Chicago's skyscrapers and boardroom battles felt increasingly distant, while this small-town celebration, with its homemade pies and honest laughter, felt increasingly like home. Sarah Wellington's world shattered with the morning edition of the Millbrook Gazette. The headlines screamed accusations that cut deeper than any boardroom betrayal. Wellington's true agenda, using small-town as corporate puppet. The article painted her as a calculating predator, suggesting her community initiatives were merely a facade to exploit local resources and labor before abandoning Millbrook once profits were secured. Walking through town that afternoon, Sarah felt the temperature drop with each encounter. Shop owners who once greeted her warmly now averted their eyes. At Maggie's restaurant, conversations hushed when she entered, replaced by whispers that followed her to her solitary table. Even Michelle, who had worked alongside her for months, kept their interactions strictly professional, doubt evident in her guarded responses. "They think I'm just another corporate vulture," Sarah confessed to Michael Jackson that evening, her voice breaking as she paced his garage floor. The mechanic listened quietly, his hands steady on an engine part, even as concern lined his face. "People here have been burned before," he explained, wiping grease from his fingers. "Big promises, then empty buildings when the money dried up." Emma brought Sarah a mug of hot chocolate, the same cinnamon-spiced comfort from their first meeting, but the gesture only amplified Sarah's sense of loss. The child's innocent trust made the community's rejection sting more sharply. That night, Sarah stared at her laptop screen until dawn, pride crumbling as she typed letter after letter. Not press releases or corporate statements, personal messages addressing each accusation with transparent honesty. She detailed her mistakes, her intentions, and her growing love for Millbrook with a vulnerability she'd never allowed herself in Chicago. For 3 days, Sarah hand-delivered these letters, enduring suspicious glances and closed doors. At Maggie's restaurant, she arrived before opening, helping to arrange chairs while explaining her vision for sustainable local growth. At the community center, she presented her financial records to Michelle, inviting scrutiny of every dollar invested. Slowly, tentatively, the ice began to thaw. Old Mr. Peterson from the hardware store nodded at her when she passed. Maggie saved her usual table again. A few residents even approached with cautious questions about the factory's future. But Sarah felt the lingering scars in every hesitant smile and qualified acceptance. Trust, once broken, mended slowly and imperfectly. As she sat alone by the lake one evening, watching the sunset paint the water gold, she realized that belonging wasn't something you could purchase or demand. It had to be earned, day by patient day, with honesty and perseverance. Sarah Wellington surveyed Chicago's skyline from her office window, the familiar steel and glass landscape, a stark contrast to Millbrook's quaint charm. The Wellington Foods headquarters hummed with activity as she reviewed quarterly reports, but her mind kept drifting to the small town that had unexpectedly captured her heart. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. When her assistant announced an unexpected visitor, Sarah was stunned to see Emma Jackson standing in the doorway, clutching a small envelope. "Emma, what are you doing in Chicago?" Sarah asked, immediately crossing the room to greet the young girl. "And Dad had to deliver a special part to a garage downtown," Emma explained, her bright eyes taking in the impressive office. "I asked if I could visit you while he finished his business." The child handed Sarah the envelope with careful reverence. "I wrote this for you." Sarah's manicured fingers trembled slightly as she opened the handwritten letter. Emma's careful penmanship filled the page with heartfelt words. "Dear Miss Sarah, I miss you when you're not in Millbrook. Dad misses you too, but he doesn't say it. The town feels different when you're here. Please don't forget us when you're in your big building. Remember the lanterns by the lake and Maggie's apple pie. Remember that you have friends here. Love, Emma." A lump formed in Sarah's throat as she read the words twice more. The corporate executive who had faced down boardroom titans without flinching now found herself fighting back tears over a child's simple honesty. "Ma, I could never forget Millbrook," she whispered, pulling Emma into a gentle hug. Later, after treating the girl to hot chocolate in the executive dining room and arranging for her driver to take Emma back to her father, Sarah returned to her office. The letter sat on her desk, a humble paper beacon amid sleek digital devices. She thought about how Emma's wisdom, uncomplicated and pure, had penetrated defenses built over decades in the corporate world. No victory over Richard Harris had ever made her feel this valued. No acquisition or merger had ever filled her with such warmth. Sarah reached for her phone, scrolling to Michael's number. Her finger hovered over the call button as she pictured his steady hands working on engines, his patient smile, the quiet dignity that had first intrigued her during that stormy night. The Wellington Foods logo glowed on the wall opposite her desk, a symbol of power she had chased relentlessly. Yet now, a child's letter held more meaning than any corporate achievement. Emma Jackson had shown her a different kind of success, one measured in connections rather than contracts. Sarah Wellington stared at the rejection letter on her desk, the board's decision hitting her like a physical blow. After weeks of presentations and negotiations, they had unanimously voted against funding the Millbrook Factory Initiative. The cold, formal language of the letter contrasted sharply with the warm promises she'd made to the townspeople. "This can't be the end," she whispered, her analytical mind already calculating alternatives. There was only one option left: her personal savings. Years of corporate success had built her a comfortable nest egg, but this would drain almost everything. Her hands trembled as she signed the loan papers the following day, each stroke of the pen stripping away another layer of her financial security. "Are you absolutely certain?" her financial advisor asked, concern evident in his voice. "I've never been more certain of anything," Sarah replied, though her racing heart betrayed her outward confidence. Meanwhile, across town in Millbrook, Michael Jackson faced his own financial crossroads. A sleek corporate representative from Automax Industries had arrived at his garage with an offer that made his breath catch. $750,000 for Jackson's auto repair. "Think about Emma's future," the representative urged, sliding glossy brochures across the workbench. "College funds, opportunities, security." Michael ran his oil-stained fingers through his hair, the weight of 3 generations of Jackson mechanics pressing on his shoulders. This garage wasn't just a business. It was his father's legacy, his grandfather's dream. That evening, Sarah arrived at the garage to find him sitting alone, staring at the faded photograph of his father that hung above the workbench. "They want to buy me out," he said simply as she sat beside him. "And you're considering it?" she asked, careful to keep judgment from her voice. "Emma deserves more than I can give her with just this place." Michael sighed, gesturing around the humble garage. "But my dad built this with his bare hands. My grandfather taught him everything he knew right here on this floor." Sarah's corporate instincts urged her to analyze the offer objectively, to calculate return on investment and future opportunities. But watching Michael's face in the dim light, she realized this wasn't about business at all. "What does your heart tell you?" she asked instead, surprising herself with the question. He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing a new side of the former CEO. "My heart's confused. What would you do?" Sarah thought about the loan papers she'd signed that morning, about risking everything for something that mattered. "Sometimes," she said softly, taking his hand, "the richest legacy isn't measured in dollars." The autumn market day had transformed Millbrook's town square into a vibrant tapestry of color and sound. Local vendors displayed handcrafted goods while children darted between stalls, their laughter mingling with folk music drifting from portable speakers. Sarah Wellington moved through the crowd, clipboard in hand, checking off the small businesses that had joined her revitalization initiative. Emma Jackson skipped ahead, her braids bouncing as she pointed excitedly at a display of handmade jewelry. "Look at these," she called to her father, who followed a few steps behind, exchanging friendly nods with townspeople who respected his work at the garage. It happened in an instant. Emma's foot caught on an uneven cobblestone, her small body pitched forward, arms windmilling as she tried to catch herself. The sickening sound of her ankle twisting was followed by a sharp cry that cut through the market's cheerful atmosphere. Michael Jackson was at his daughter's side before anyone could blink, his usual composed demeanor shattered. "Emma, baby!" "I'm here," he gasped, gathering her into his arms. His large hands trembled as they hovered over her ankle, already swelling beneath her colorful sock. "It hurts, Daddy," Emma whimpered, tears streaming down her face. The mechanic's voice broke as he whispered reassurances, his calm facade crumbling completely. "I know, sweetheart, I know. We'll get you fixed up." His eyes, usually steady and confident when handling any mechanical problem, now reflected raw panic and helplessness. Sarah pushed through the gathering crowd, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Michael, what happened?" She knelt beside them, designer jeans pressing into the dirt without hesitation. She fell, her ankle. Michael couldn't finish, his attention focused entirely on comforting his daughter. Something inside Sarah cracked open at the sight. This man who had faced every challenge with quiet strength now looked utterly lost. Cradling his injured child, without thinking, she placed her hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension beneath his worn flannel shirt. "I'll call Dr. Patterson," she said, already pulling out her phone. "And my car is just around the corner. We can get there faster than waiting for help." As she made the arrangements, unexpected tears blurred her vision. She wiped them away impatiently, but they kept coming. For years, she had maintained perfect composure through hostile takeovers and boardroom battles. Yet here, watching a father's love laid bare, her carefully constructed walls crumbled. Michael looked up, noticing her tears. Their eyes met in silent understanding, vulnerability recognized and accepted without judgment. In that moment, as they huddled together over Emma's small form, the final barriers between their worlds dissolved completely. The call came at 3 in the morning. Sarah Wellington fumbled for her phone, heart sinking as she heard the night supervisor's panicked voice. The main assembly line had catastrophically failed, and 3 key suppliers had just pulled out of their contracts, citing payment concerns. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she promised, already reaching for her clothes. The factory floor was eerily quiet when she arrived. Workers stood in small clusters, their faces tight with worry. This wasn't just a mechanical failure. It was the potential collapse of everything she'd built in Millbrook. Every job, every family's security, every promise she'd made to this community hung in the balance. "The hydraulic system is completely shot," the maintenance manager explained, pointing to the twisted metal. "And without parts from Westfield Industries, we can't fix it. They've cancelled our order." Along with Reynolds and McIntosh, Sarah felt the weight of every eye in the room. These people had trusted her vision, had believed in her when she'd asked them to. Now their livelihoods were in jeopardy because of equipment she'd approved and contracts she'd negotiated. "Call Michael Jackson," she said suddenly. "He might have some ideas." Michael arrived within minutes, his work clothes hastily thrown on, concern etched across his face. He assessed the damage with practiced eyes, then turned to Sarah. "This isn't just about parts," he said quietly. "Someone's been tampering with these machines. Look at these cuts. They're deliberate." Sarah's mind immediately flashed to Richard Harris. This had his fingerprints all over it. "Can you fix it?" she asked, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. Michael hesitated. "Maybe, but we need specialized tools that—" He stopped mid-sentence, his expression changing. "Wait, there might be something." He disappeared to his truck and returned carrying an old, worn leather case. Inside was a peculiar wrench, its metal burnished with decades of use. "My father's custom-made pressure wrench," he explained. "He designed it for impossible jobs." Through the night, they worked side by side. Sarah held flashlights, passed tools, and learned the intricate language of machinery from Michael's patient instructions. As dawn approached, they jury-rigged solutions using parts from 3 different systems. Workers gathered around as Michael made the final adjustments with his father's wrench. When the assembly line hummed back to life, a cheer erupted across the factory floor. In the pale morning light, Sarah looked at Michael, his hands still stained with grease, fatigue lining his face. Something had shifted between them, a trust deeper than words, a partnership forged in crisis. "And thank you," she whispered, her voice catching. Michael simply nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "Some things are worth saving," he said. The lawsuit landed on Sarah Wellington's desk like a grenade. Richard Harris had filed an injunction against the Millbrook factory expansion, claiming environmental violations that didn't exist. His signature at the bottom of the legal document might as well have been a declaration of war. "He's trying to bury us in paperwork," Sarah explained to Michael as they sat in Maggie's restaurant, the smell of fresh coffee doing little to ease her tension. "Richard knows I don't have Wellington Foods' legal team anymore." Michael reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. "But you have something he doesn't. This town behind you." The next weeks became a blur of depositions and deadlines. Sarah converted her small apartment above the town's bookstore into a makeshift war room, walls covered with documents and legal strategies. Each morning began before sunrise, and each night ended long after the town had gone quiet. Michelle organized a fundraiser to help with legal costs, while Maggie kept Sarah fed with daily deliveries. The community's support was unwavering, but the lawsuit drained resources faster than they could be replenished. "You need to sleep," Michael insisted one night, finding her surrounded by stacks of papers, her eyes red-rimmed. "I can't," she whispered. "If we lose this, everyone loses their jobs. The factory closes. I promise them, Michael." What she couldn't articulate was the deeper fear gnawing at her insides, that she would fail these people who had become her family, that they would abandon her when they realized she wasn't the savior they thought. The terror of being alone again, of returning to her empty penthouse in Chicago, paralyzed her more than any lawsuit. Richard's tactics grew dirtier. He leaked stories to regional newspapers, painting Sarah as a corporate raider exploiting small-town America. He approached investors, poisoning potential partnerships with whispered doubts. During a particularly brutal deposition, Richard cornered Sarah in the hallway. "You should have stayed in your lane," he hissed. "Corner offices and charity galas, that was your world, not this." Sarah straightened her shoulders. "You're right, Richard. That was my world. This," she gestured toward the window where Millbrook's main street was visible, "this is my home." That night, she confessed her fears to Michael as they sat on his porch. Emma asleep inside. "What if I can't win this? What if I've dragged everyone down with me?" Michael took her hand. "Then we'll start again. Together." For the first time in her life, Sarah understood that failure wouldn't mean abandonment. The realization gave her strength to face whatever came next, even Richard Harris. Sarah Wellington stood at the entrance of Jackson's Auto Repair, her heart hammering against her ribs. The garage doors were locked, the lights off. Michael Jackson had vanished without a trace or word, his cell phone going straight to voicemail with each desperate call. "Have you seen Michael?" she asked everyone she encountered in Millbrook's quiet streets. The mechanic's absence felt like a physical wound. Each shake of a head deepened her fear that she'd somehow driven him away with her relentless ambition, or the chaos the lawsuit had brought to their lives. Sarah paced the floor of her rented cottage, mind racing through possibilities. Had Richard Harris somehow gotten to him? Had the pressure of their relationship become too much? The night stretched endlessly as she drove through town again, checking the lake, the market, even the factory. "He wouldn't just leave," Emma insisted when Sarah stopped by their home, the little girl's eyes wide with worry, but certain of her father's character. "Dad always says goodbye." By midnight, Sarah had rallied Michelle and Maggie to help search. The restaurant owner brought thermoses of coffee while Michelle organized volunteers to check the surrounding countryside. "I've never needed anyone before," Sarah confessed to Maggie as they drove along dark country roads. "Now I can't breathe thinking he might be gone." The older woman squeezed her hand. "That's what real love does, honey. It makes us brave enough to be vulnerable." Dawn broke with golden fingers across the horizon when Sarah's phone finally rang. She nearly crashed her vehicle answering it. "Sarah?" Michael's voice was raspy with exhaustion. "I'm at the old Miller farm." 20 minutes later, she found him emerging from a weathered farmhouse, dark circles under his eyes, clothes rumpled from a sleepless night. Before he could speak, Sarah threw her arms around him, relief washing through her like a tidal wave. "James Miller had a heart scare," he explained, his strong arms returning her embrace. "No phone service out here. I couldn't leave him alone until the doctor arrived." Sarah pressed her forehead against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. "I thought you'd left because of me, because of all this chaos I brought into your life." Michael Jackson tilted her chin up, his expression serious. "I'm not going anywhere, Sarah. Not without telling you first." Standing there in the pink light of morning, Sarah Wellington, who had built empires and faced down boardrooms of hostile executives, finally understood what true courage meant. It wasn't in winning lawsuits or saving factories. It was in allowing yourself to need someone completely, and in being someone others could rely on without question. "Take me home," she whispered, and for the first time she meant Millbrook. The autumn evening painted Millbrook in hues of amber and gold, as residents gathered by the lake for a celebration that marked more than just a business victory. Sarah Wellington stood at the edge of the crowd, watching lanterns being released onto the water's surface. Each glowing orb represented a job saved, a family sustained, a community preserved. Richard Harris had finally conceded defeat. His lawsuit collapsed when evidence of his underhanded tactics came to light, leaving the factory's future secure. The corporate shark had retreated to Chicago, tail between his legs, while Sarah remained in the small town that had somehow become home. "You did it," Michelle said, approaching with 2 cups of Maggie's famous apple cider. "Not many people stand up to Richard and win." Sarah accepted the warm drink gratefully. "We did it together," she corrected, glancing around at the faces that had become familiar, the factory workers, the shopkeepers, the families whose livelihoods depended on the success they now celebrated. Across the gathering, Michael Jackson helped Emma adjust her jacket against the evening chill. The mechanic caught Sarah's eye and smiled, that same gentle expression that had first cracked her defenses months ago in his garage. He whispered something to his daughter, who giggled and nodded enthusiastically before running off toward Maggie's refreshment table. The lanterns drifted farther across the lake, their reflections creating twin constellations, one above, one below, as violin music floated through the air. Sarah felt a presence beside her and turned to find Michael, his weathered hands slightly nervous as they found hers. "Beautiful night," he said simply. "Perfect," she agreed, realizing she meant it completely. They walked along the wooden pier, away from the crowd but still within the golden glow of the celebration. The water lapped gently against the supports beneath them, a rhythmic soundtrack to the moment. "I never thanked you properly," Michael said, "for believing in this town when everyone else saw it as a tax write-off." Sarah squeezed his hand. "And I never thanked you for showing me what really matters." Emma appeared suddenly, breathless with excitement, clutching something in her small palm. She pressed the object into her father's hand with a conspiratorial wink before skipping back toward the shore, leaving them alone. Michael's eyes shone with emotion as he looked down at what his daughter had delivered, a small silver ring with a single modest stone that caught the lantern light. "She's been keeping this safe," he explained, voice thick with feeling. "It was my mother's." Sarah felt her heart racing as Michael took her hand, his eyes reflecting the dancing lights on the water and something deeper, something that felt like home. The golden sunset painted the lake in amber hues as Michael Jackson led Sarah Wellington along the wooden pier. His hands trembled slightly, not from the mechanical precision he usually commanded, but from the weight of what he was about to do. The entire town of Millbrook had gathered for the celebration, their victory over Richard Harris's lawsuit and the saving of the factory that would secure their future. Emma Jackson bounced excitedly between Michelle and Maggie, clutching a small velvet box she'd been entrusted with. The young girl's eyes sparkled with anticipation as she watched her father and the woman who had become so important to both of them. "Remember when your car broke down that stormy night?" Michael asked, his voice soft, yet somehow carrying over the gentle lapping of water against the pier posts. Sarah smiled, her normally guarded expression open and radiant. "How could I forget? I was so furious at the universe." "You made me a promise that night," he continued, taking both her hands in his. "You said, 'If you fix this engine, I'll marry you,'" Sarah finished, laughing at the memory of her flippant remark. The mechanic's eyes crinkled at the corners. I fixed that engine. And then somehow you fixed something in me too. Emma darted forward then, pressing the small box into her father's palm before retreating to stand beside Maggie, who wrapped a protective arm around the child's shoulders. Michael slowly lowered himself to one knee, the wooden planks creaking beneath him. The community leader, Michelle, began ushering people closer, forming a semicircle of supportive faces, the same people who had once viewed Sarah with suspicion. "Dara Wellington," Michael said, opening the box to reveal a simple yet elegant ring. "I'm collecting on that promise, but only if you want to keep it. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, catching the last rays of sunlight. The former CEO, who had once measured success in profit margins and boardroom victories, found herself speechless before this man who valued integrity over income. "Yes," she finally whispered. Then louder, "Yes!" As Michael slipped the ring onto her finger, cheers erupted around them. Emma rushed forward, throwing her arms around both adults. The three embraced as a family while Millbrook celebrated around them. Later, as lanterns floated across the water like earthbound stars, Sarah leaned against Michael's shoulder. The weight of corporate armor she'd worn for years had finally fallen away. In its place was something lighter yet infinitely stronger: love, community, and the knowledge that the most powerful contracts weren't signed in boardrooms, but sealed with promises made from the heart.